So I think the challenge now is back on the player and the people around the player to really hone in on that development. So great if you get recruited and you sign with the power conference and you're getting a little NIL cash at the beginning. You better make sure you're reinvesting that NIL money into your development and really looking at it like you're a pro already, as it relates to, making sure you're getting time with your quarterback trainer if you have one from high school, because the college guys, again, really aren't going to have the time to focus on your mechanics and footwork, especially if you're the 2 or the 3.
Welcome back, or welcome to Y Option. I'm Yogi Roth. We're, of course, joined by Jim Thornby. I'm coming to you live from frigid Dallas, Texas for the Cotton Bowl. Jim is in Northern California. Jim, before we even get going, of course, we want to send all of our love to everyone in Southern California. I flew out as the fires were beginning in Malibu, and by the time I landed in Dallas, majority of everyone that our family has known on the west side of LA and the Palisades had evacuated. So hopefully everyone is safe. Hopefully maybe this hour-long podcast can give you something else to think about as you're going through so many real-life things in real life compared to all the football jargon that we're constantly talking about here. So we're thinking about all of you on every front. I know my colleague, Rhett Lewis, he lives in Malibu. His family has dealt with this many times. Hopefully their home is okay. I'm sure Red will talk about that whenever that's appropriate as well. But love to everybody involved, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. I lived in LA many years ago now, but a good majority of my friends are all still living down there. So just talking with them, so far so good on all that front, because they're kind of scattered all over the region there. But just crazy to watch the video of the flames. I mean, I can remember, and when I lived down there, watching different, having different fires and stuff like that. I remember, the mountain right above where the observatory right there in Los Feliz, when that was in danger. God, that's probably 15, close to 20 years ago now. But it's crazy, and definitely think about everybody out there.
Just a week ago, right? We all were at the Rose Bowl. I brought my family. They wrote about it at yoption.com in our latest newsletter. And I took my dad to Lake Shrine. It's a meditation center on PCH on your way to Malibu. And once that got evacuated, you were like, oh my God, because that means it came over Malibu and into the Palisades. You saw the Getty Villa on PCH. That has reportedly caught on fire. Like, it's just so real. You're seeing the schools. I'm talking to my kids in the morning about it. You can see it in the sky. Like, it's crazy, even where we live, as you might imagine, with the wind. So let's hope that was the worst of it. And let's hope that no lives are lost. One note on that before we move on. I can remember years ago, Jim, I had dinner with a firefighter in LA. And I can remember talking to him about like the courage that so many of these firefighters have to go in. And he said they all kind of said the same thing. It's like, you go in and it's such it's such a monumental thing to try to tackle. And what you realize afterwards is all the material items don't really matter. And I think that, like, as we're watching homes burn and, things that are lost that have great meaning to people, nothing is greater than life. So we haven't heard anything tragic like that yet around this instance. So hopefully everyone has gotten out, and the community of LA will show up for one another. They'll help you. They'll feed you. Our family will do that as well. If anybody needs anything, let us know as well, because it is a real thing. Okay. It also a real thing is where I sit now, right? In college football, we are down to the semifinals. Today, we're going to bring on Brian Stumpf. Brian is the president of the Elite 11. Nobody has a greater pulse on the quarterback position in the history of the last 27 years than Brian Stumpf. He's been running the Elite 11, the premier quarterback camp. So we're going to talk about all the transfers. We're also going to talk about the 4 quarterbacks in these semifinal matchups in Penn State and Notre Dame. And then, of course, the one that I'm going to be covering in Ohio State and Texas. So that'll be coming up shortly. As always, it's presented by our founding partner, 76. So with that said, Jim, let's talk about, where do you net out right now on the semifinals? Because I think we're in an interesting place with both Penn State and Texas playing their 16th game of the season, which would be an NFL schedule. We wrote about it at Y Option. I'm wondering how that landed on you.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. And I guess, you're going to have the one side of the argument where people are like, well, these guys are getting paid now. So like, this is a professional league, but I mean, it's not. As much as some people would like to make it that way, we're not anywhere really near that point yet. There's still a long way to go before this is quote unquote professional football. I mean, personally, I hope that's not where it's going, even though I know that's where it's going. And that is not in a way or any way sense in saying that I don't wish the players to be rewarded for, for what they've been doing. Just there's a reason that college football and professional football were different. I mean, it's got a different vibe. There's a more connectedness to college football, whether especially if you were or are a student, like, you had these guys in your classes per se, so there is that, like, there's much more of a connectedness through that than there is to professional sports. But in the long run, I mean, yes, the season is too long. Yeah. Like it's and that's kind of like why when we were talking when the seedings came out, and we made the argument of like the bye week was a huge advantage, because that's one less game where you can get guys hurt. Now it turns out all the 4 teams that had the bye week all lost. So it kind of, but this is, I mean, it's small sample size, obviously. Like, it's 4 games, unfortunately, or fortunately, either way you look at it, the format will change as we go along. So this will be just kind of a footnote of this is how it was in this year and not moving forward. But it'll be hard to really say whether, how that advantage really worked into everything.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. Like, we're not in professional football yet, but we might have the most professional team playing in Ohio State. Like, they have the most amount of pros on their roster. I'd say Texas, Ohio, Penn State, and Notre Dame in probably that order. When you look at the amount of talent that is going to the Senior Bowl with our friend Jim Nagy, or can project out, or of course, if you want to go down, what is reportedly paid to those rosters. So I think it's interesting. Like, you're right, it's not a professional sport, but we might have a couple professional teams. And I think that's the dance. I think when you look at the playoff, I kept going through in my head, like, who would the 4 teams have been? Okay, Oregon would have been the 1 seed. Who would have been? Okay, Georgia would have been in, right? Like, who would have been the other 2? Like, would Notre Dame have gotten in? Ohio State wouldn't have gotten in, right? Would Boise have gotten in? Probably not. Would Arizona State have gotten in? I doubt it. Like you start playing it out, and I think of the Ducks, who we covered at the Rose Bowl. They might be sitting right now, a year ago, playing for a national championship right now. Going for a rematch against Georgia from Dan Lanning's first ever game. Like, that's a real world, and they would win that game. I feel confident in stating that, based on where Georgia sits today realistically, and what we thought at least Oregon had been all season long in advance of the Ohio State game. So it's just totally different. And I think that's kind of cool. I really do. And I think, to your point, that the best point of not being pros to me and still being in college is that you still get the same generation of kids that can ride this wave that's different than being a pro and being pretty steady. So I love how James Franklin has been 1 game at a time all year. 1-0, 1-0, 1-0. Ohio State Ryan Day came out earlier this week and talked about how, like, it is like the NFL. Like, every week is this new life, because, like, it's over if you lose. And it's how do you keep the focus for 16 games? Right? Jeremiah Smith is playing in 16 games as a true freshman. Now, he's a different animal, but still, we talked to Chip about it last week, and he said his maturity is so unique. But can the other young players, they get pulled up to that level of maturity? I would assume so, but can they also pull it down? And classes started this week. Like, we haven't heard a drop about that, even at Notre Dame, right? I'd imagine they all got a little bit of a hall pass. So all things to consider, I think, as we move forward. I want to bring up one point before we move on, because there's some things I want to talk about from the games that we saw. I wrote this in the newsletter, and I think it's going to get some play. I'm talking to a lot of people that we've all heard about the private equity entering college football, right? It first came to the Pac-12 years ago with Larry Scott. Like, was private equity, I think it was Rain Capital, where they're going to buy into a conference. right? And the league, the Pac-12 at the time, went really far down that road. Eventually, from everything I've told, the presidents and the powers that be at each campus said, no, we don't want to go do that. Well, now I think it's even more micro. Like, I've talked to a lot of people this past week that have talked about, and so has billionaires have said this publicly. They're talking about, do we go buy a football team? Like, does some billionaire go and really buy and run Michigan football? You could argue Larry Ellison has a big fingerprint in that, reportedly, or Dave Portnoy or whomever. But is there a world where somebody buys it and they have a team president and they hire Kevin Warren like they did the Chicago Bears? Is that an athletic director per se, right? And then they hire a GM, which is clearly the hot element right now. GMs are getting paid like legit money, and we're talking like $700 to over $1 million at most big time places to run it. And then my final point on that is that, like, the more coaches I talked to a head coach in college football over the weekend, where he said his building is split down the middle like the NFL. He said he doesn't even really call it like the old school head of recruiting. Now it's like the assistant GM, and they are slotting in players and evaluating players and saying, this is your new receiver. And I don't think in college yet we're seeing many places where the GM oversees the head coach. Like, we see that at Stanford. That came out with Andrew Luck. I haven't heard of that anywhere else. I wouldn't imagine many head coaches in college would want that to happen at their respective institution or within their team, but that model may come. So I just say all that of, like, get ready for the next wave. Like, it may not become athletes are employees, but golly, there's a next step that I think will seem like, oh my God, out of left field, but it's not. Like, it is percolating under the surface, like private equity, ownership of a team in college. Like, don't be shocked because of the amount of money that's needed. Like, how many schools have $100 million now in revenue share to go give a coach a 10-year contract to $10 million a year? Not as many as you think. And I don't know if the market's going to get reset in the head coaching circle among the top 20 to 30 teams as we're watching TV and rights and viewerships like hit record peaks right now, as the sport is as popular as it's ever been.
Yeah, but how long will it stay that popular if it goes towards that model? Because in my eyes, when I'm looking at everything or listening to everything that you just described on that, like, how many schools can actually like do that? Like, there's that, right. There's the 4 schools that are currently still alive that would definitely be in that category. There's the Georgias, the Alabamas, the USCs, the Michigans. That there's probably that the quote, the schools they call the quote unquote blue bloods. Those that are elite, not always on the field, but elite as far as revenue that you get. That was one of the great things I thought about this year was Boise State making the playoff, Arizona State making the playoff. Do those schools even still compete on that same level as the model shifts in that direction? And those are the schools that were successful this year. Never mind all these schools in the quote unquote power conferences right now that finished 500 and went to whatever bowl. Where are they getting the money to hang with Ohio State? So then it becomes even like you feel like this year you're like, oh, maybe the things had kind of solved themselves because Alabama no longer has 4 and 5 stars as on their 2, 3, 4 deep at a position, where now NIL has kind of spread that out. But as this private equity kind of world kind of comes into it, does that continue to narrow that down back to get not only where we were before, but an even heightened version of where we were before of the haves and the have-nots?
It's a cool conversation. And I'll say this. I've also talked to Power 4 head coaches that are not able to hire or are choosing to not hire. I want to give like a real tangible example. Like, if you go into a Big Ten school and you went into the team or the staff room, there'd be about 50 to 62 people that are full-time on staff. When I was coaching at USC, there was 15, and we were stretching, right? That's 20 years ago, right? I say that of like, there's teams in Power 4 football now saying, we're not going to hire, call it person number 50 through 55, because we want to make sure we take that money and allocate it towards our players. We're in this unique space. Like, and we wrote about it. I wrote about it in our most recent newsletter. Revenue sharing is we expect it to come in late summer, right? Right before training camp. And that'll be the model. Between now and then, we live in this world where you can kind of pay anybody anything because nothing's really getting checked or balanced, right? NIL deals will have to be above board, presumably, in the next coming year. So there's this world now where like, it's like, if you're ahead, you can get ahead as much as you want. Now, to your point, let's just say those 5 or 10, and let's just say these 4 programs here become private equity. They're in the semifinals right now. I don't believe that just because you have the most amount of money, you're going to be the best team in the totality of a season. Ohio State is a perfect example of that. They were not that. They wouldn't have made a 14 playoff. I don't think they would have made an 18 playoff. They weren't that team when you look at how they lost at the end of the season to Michigan. Like, there were teams that had better bodies of work than them, and they reportedly have the most expensive roster in America. Now, as the time plays out, I do believe that the best teams will just lean on you. And I think that's where we sit here in this semifinal. Like, I look at Ohio State and Penn State as the 2 best teams. I really do. I think Texas, after studying a few games for them in advance of our, all of the content we'll do on Big Ten Network in advance of the game, like, they don't look as talented as those 2 teams. Now, we'll see. Notre Dame, they don't look as talented as the 3 other teams. We'll see. We'll see how the games shake out. But I just think as you get into like playoff mode, that's where like the talent, and if you want to say the rich, really can separate. But in the totality of a season, like Iowa and Michigan State and Illinois, they can go play with anybody that has a ton of money in the Big Ten, for instance. We saw Vanderbilt beat Alabama. We saw Oklahoma beat Alabama. I think in the totality of a season, it doesn't matter as much. I think in the longevity of this this playoff world, this expanded playoff world, that's where you see the better teams. Like, you just saw it in the first round. Indiana wasn't close. SMU wasn't close. And I get it, like picks and all those things happen in the game. But if you just watch the roster, we've talked about this on the show before, 1 through 22, if you put Indiana, SMU, and Penn State's roster up against each other, probably 1 through 17, the best players are going to be on Penn State's roster. Like, I just think they're more talented. So let's go to the very end of this thing. I also talked to Group of 5 head coaches and staffs this week, and I've just been, there's no game, so I get bored, Jim. I'm just talking to coaches all day long. But these are the teams that are totally screwed. These are the teams that are going to completely screw. Because number one, let's just say they rebuilt their roster. Because they had, UAB is a great example. They've had to rebuild their roster under Trent Dilfer. There's not a lot of positivity on the outside looking in on that program. So they're doing that. They're going to have a whole new roster. And then they're going to play in the spring. And you know what's going to happen? Their best 3 players in the spring are going to get a call from a nearby institution, right? Or a far-off institution that needs an edge rusher, that needs an interior offensive lineman. And they're going to say, hey, man, because this new world hasn't shown up yet in terms of rules and regulations, here's $400,000 to come be our, or here's $200,000 to come be our, like, that's where, like, I feel the worst. Like, part of me feels bad for, like, call it Cal, Arizona, like schools like in our footprint that we talk about a lot that don't have that coin that you'd assume that an Ohio State or Texas or Penn State might have. But I really feel for, like, the tier below that, because they're the ones that are just getting rated right now. And they're just going to continue in the second wave of the portal get rated. So with all that said, we do have something to celebrate. So we do have these teams in the semifinals. 0 conference champions, as you referenced. Let's look back before we look forward. And again, we got Brian Stumpf coming on. I know watching it, it seemed as though in the quarterfinals that, like, officiating seemed to be all over the board. It seemed that way for me. I know in basketball, it seems like leagues officiate differently. In football, I mean, I've worked in the Pac-12. I call games in the Big 12 and the Big 10 this year. Like, I didn't feel that as a broadcaster, but God, didn't it seem kind of like inconsistent throughout last weekend?
Ready, set, Use French fries to go. Yeah, oil from French fries. Turn yesterday's leftovers into today's fuel. More power, lower emissions. 76 renewable diesel fuels all the ways you go, go, go.
Yeah, definitely last weekend for sure. And I would even say, because, you know, I, as I've mentioned many times on this show, I spend way too much time online looking through, you know, mostly looking for news or what have you, but stumbling across, you know, the X complaint and this fan base about whatever. Like, I feel like there was a definite, like, what's the word I'm trying to think for, you know, realization for USC fans this year that Big Ten officials call the game different than Pac-12 officials did. Like, that was like a common thread, at least online, at least from a fan's perspective. I don't want to put that on the teams, but
And were
you know,
fans happy with that?
No,
like,
it was surprisingly, as I've said, as the guy who got all the complaint emails the previous 3 years, you know, why did this happen? Why did that happen? Like, trust me, I heard and seen them all. Some of them, you guys were correct. I'll just I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it seemed like they were definitely, you know, not used to the style of even what is holding, what is pass interference, you know, like things that are obviously objective. I mean, a holding and pass interference, those happen on every single play. I mean, realistically, you know, it's whether or not the official decides to call that based on the impact or whatever. But you did see so many calls in these quarterfinals that I don't want to say necessarily alarming. The only one that really kind of bothered me was the non-targeting call at the end of regulation with Arizona State, Texas. I thought that was, I mean, from everything that I've been told about targeting the last decade plus, you know, every time that we've talked to a rules person and they've given us, like, to me, that was like textbook targeting. You know, it's a defenseless wide receiver, you know, getting helmet to helmet contact. It doesn't have to be the crown of the helmet because he is defenseless. There were so many other ones that were sometimes you would say an obvious call or not obvious call. Like the one where Cam Scottaboo got like basically suplexed into the end zone by his offensive lineman. Like, you're not allowed to do that. But I can see if maybe, you know, that's in the middle of, you know, in the line and stuff like that, that maybe it's not seen properly or however, and that's not something that you would go back and then review after the fact. But there is kind of like just an overall, you know, even, you know, the Big 12 commissioner, you know, said, hey, we need to know some national standards here on officiating. And I've always been a proponent of that. I feel like that officiating should go away from the conferences and have a national thing. That would be the one thing where a quote unquote pro model, like going towards the NFL, I would be 100% in favor of, because all the officiating questions and concerns, all that does, and not all that does, but it's a major PR hit for each one of those leagues. It's all year long. All anyone does is complain about the officials in X conference, and, you know, blah 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 this or you know that. And now in these games where it's where you don't have officials from either school's conference in that. So like, what was it? So these in these semifinal games, it's going to be an ACC crew calling the Cotton Bowl. It's going to be a Big 12 crew calling the Orange Bowl, because neither of those conferences have teams in those games. But it's going to still come back. People will go, oh, they want this conference to win because there's so much, because there is so much money involved in it. It needs to kind of be taken out of that equation where there's, you know, because there's going to be the natural impulse to say they're biased towards this or biased towards that because of this conference or that or what have you. It needs to have a more national feel to it where you do have a quote unquote consistency to the whole thing.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting? Like, so many thoughts come up when you say that. I think big picture. How many times did we look at the Rose Bowl last week, or did you hear, like, I don't know, the face of college football is Kirk Herbstreit, right?
Yep.
And how many times you hear in the broadcast and be like, look at the sunset, look at the pageantry, and us. This is what this show is about. Like, we celebrate the game and coach the viewer. That's where we have built this foundation of this on, because that is Jim and that is my personality. That is how we view the game. And Kirk was right. The Rose Bowl was that moment. Like, college football needed that moment. It also needed home games because it was epic, right? And we had the regular season, which had all the drama. And now we enter the corporate world of the semifinals, right? Or other versions of the other playoff games. You didn't see capacity crowds anywhere other than in the Rose Bowl. I think Stu Mandel wrote a piece on The Athletic around the percentage of seats that were empty at the other playoff games. Like, there is a corporate element to this thing. And I think as lovers of this game, we want to desperately hold on to the pageantry. We want to desperately believe in the development. We want to unbiasedly think that college is this 4-year window to go from a young man to a real man when it comes to at least male student athletes in the sport that we're talking about here in college football. Hard stop. Then there's what we've talked about this whole time, the business of it, the rev sharing of it, the payment of players of it. You talk about the officiating. Like, there's a world where conferences, I think, have enjoyed having, I think whenever we say like control, it comes off negative, but I think it's like, you have your world that you're navigating, right? It's your championship game. It's your officials. It's your student athlete awards. It's your sponsorship. It's your thing. I think that we need to get to a place, and again, like, the easy answer is like, have Nick Saban run college football, but there has to be a governing body, and maybe it's the Big Ten and the SEC come in and jointly join forces, because Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti are incredibly intelligent. Like, whatever move they make next is not just going to benefit their institutions. I think they see the grand picture of college football and the juice they have within it. I'm just projecting here. So where do they go? I think there's a world where, like, we have to accept reality of there is a professionalization of the sport. And there's also the reason it's so popular. It's because of the passion in the sport. It's like European soccer, right? Talk to anybody who's come over from Europe and they're like, it's college football, not the NFL. Unless you're at a Steeler game, right? Like, there aren't a lot of fan bases that have what Ohio State fans have and Texas fans have. And, it could be the Cowboys and the Steelers, maybe. I'm trying to think of any other ones, but like, none really jump to top of mind at the professional level. So I think there needs to be a world where we accept this reality and then make some real rules around it and safeguards. Because right now there's really no rule that anybody is worried about, and you shouldn't be, right? Like, I think you sent me a tweet or somebody said something. It was like, I can't believe they're tampering with our player. And it's like, what is tampering? Right? Like, what is tampering now? Because if I want somebody on Jim Thornby's team, I'm not calling that player. I'm not calling his quarterback coach. I'm not calling his mom and dad. I'm not sliding into anybody's DMs. I am calling his agent and saying, hey, would so-and-so on your team for $200,000 come to this team and be a day one starter? That's not tampering, folks. That's like reality today. So I think that whether it's officiating, conferences, having control over officials, like, to your all the things that we're talking about are all bad PR hits to the sport we love. Right. So at some point, whether 10 teams become private equity or conferences, officials keep taking hits, like, there will be a point where I think fans get a little turned off. Because some already are. So last point on this, I was just talking to my colleague Ashley Adamson about next season and like, where do we want to go in the spring? What schools do we want to go visit in training camp? And part of me, in my first year covering the Big Ten, I was really I was probably over anal on my preparation to get to know every team in my first year. So I was like, I got to know every team top to bottom. Well, now as you're watching every team, most teams are flipping top to bottom. Right? So like the years where it was like, oh, I remember when he signed on signing day and now he's a third-year player and finally a starter. They are few and far between. It's almost like you clean the slate and you're like, all right, who's Iowa? they just got an FCS quarterback. Is it a version of Max Brosmer? Like, what do we think this is going to be? Like, it's a different deal than it's ever been. And I think in totality, what I would love to see is the calendar in college football adjust. So all these things that Jim, you referenced that can potentially be negative PR hits become things to look forward to and lean into. Oh, like free agency, like the draft, like the coaching carousel, like all the things that the NFL has nailed. That is the next version for college football.
Yeah, but it's funny if you think the amount of infrastructure that need, and I'm not talking about not physical buildings, just people that need to be injected to, make all of that work.
Well, I wonder, is it more people or is it a reorg of the people? Like, I think the people are there. It's just like, okay, are we open to, instead of running, the officiating headquarters and calling it like the SEC or the Big Ten or the ACC headquarters, it's the college football headquarters, and Chicago has these 25 games and Birmingham has these 25 games. Like, and you just kind of rebrand that. Now, the challenge in college football that we all love, me included, is that you claim your space. You claim your space in college football because it's a regional sport that has gotten flattened out to a degree with realignment. So that it's not easy. It's super nuanced. I'm not asking to run it, but I think that is an answer moving forward. Because in 5 years, if we don't know any of the players and USC keeps turning over their roster, and you can't, and you, like I recommended in our newsletter, like on your second transfer as a quarterback, I think you have to sign a 2-year deal. Jaden Rashada is going to go to his third school. I feel terrible for him because he's got the clay to be really good. If he doesn't, I think he sprained a thumb or broke his thumb moving in this last spring, he might have won the starting job. Maybe he would have lost the starting job. Who knows? But he gets injured, doesn't do spring ball, transfers. He's the fourth string quarterback at Georgia. I know football well enough to know how many reps the fourth string quarterback is getting with the ones. You run a scout team all year, bro, or you're just standing there trying to take mental reps. Meanwhile, plotting, like, how do I navigate my next move? You're not getting better. So I think those are the things. And I think you get a Nick Saban and a Chris Peterson and, some others in a room and then have somebody like you organize it all. What do you think?
Yeah. Give me a holler, Nick. Let's work this out.
Yeah. Or you get a GM.
That's the thing. It has to be a combination of old school knowledge with new school, creativity. Yeah, like that's the only way that'll work. Because, like, I've watched plenty of, Game Day or whatever. Nick Saban is definitely about how things used to be.
Yeah.
Not that he can't be progressive about what it was, but I feel like when I listen to him talk, it's about how the things were even 5 years ago, and wanting to keep, how do we keep that? So you got to have someone else on the up and coming side, I guess, to balance those views and to use all that institutional knowledge that someone like a Nick Saban would have to balance that all together, because it needs both sides to be able to make this thing continue to go forward.
Yeah. All right. Last note on that. And then let's pick our games and who we think is going to win in these semifinals. A thought might be every conference has someone who runs football. I think those are the people that are so dialed because they're talking to head coaches weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, like they're presenting and proposing, whether it's rule adjustments or adjustments to roster sizes, they're navigating. I think those people call it the Power Four leagues, if you will, if not even a couple more, call it the six of them, add in the Pac-12 and the Mountain West, if you will, or the ACC or AAC and go seven. Like those people, to me, along with a Saban and a Peterson and a David Shaw, for instance, like that's those to get in the room. To me, that would be really, really big thinkers. Then add in like Adam Grant, add in like somebody way outside that just thinks differently. Add in a Malcolm Gladwell, like something just like I think that what a cool, like if you put them in a room for 6 months and they met once a week. Like, I think that we could come up with something pretty powerful. Okay, speaking of powerful, the semifinals. Where do you net out, Jim, when you look at the game? I'm here in Dallas. The game is going to go. The Cotton Bowl said, regardless of the weather that's coming in at the snow here, that's in my window in this hotel, the game will go on. Texas, Ohio State is the Friday, and on Thursday in Miami, it's Penn State, and like every kid I grew up with flew down to Miami against Notre Dame. What do you think about those two games?
I think it's going to be interesting because I don't know why. Maybe it's the NFL calendar, but I think there hasn't been the same buzz heading into these two games that there was for the quarterfinals. I don't know if that's because of what we talked about earlier with the length of the season, but I think they're going to be two really fun games to watch. I mean, just from a pure talent perspective, Ohio State and Texas, arguably the two most talented teams in the country. But if that Ohio State team that showed up in Pasadena shows up, ain't nobody beating them. I mean, let's be real there. That was as an impressive performance as we'll see. And Texas, for as talented as they are, Arizona State had them. I mean, Arizona State went from struggling right off the bat to coming all the way back to having the chance to put that game away. So Texas has really got to step up their game if they're going to be able to hang with Ohio State in that game. As for the other game, it's interesting because Abdul Qadir, the reports I last saw was he's a game time decision now for that game. I think that's going to be a very interesting part of that matchup. These were the two teams that I think going into the postseason that I had the most questions about. The two teams that I needed to still see them prove it to me. I feel like they both mostly did. Probably Penn State a little bit more. So that's why I think I would lean towards Penn State in this game. Okay.
Abdul Qadir, we talked about this in the beginning of the season. Okay. He's one of the most dominant players in the country. I believe I know the Penn State program decently well. And I think it's a really healthy culture. I'm a big James Franklin fan, Andy Kotelnicki, Tom Allen. Like, it's as good of a staff as you'll find in the country. To that point, we are in a new era, right? Is the season too long? I wonder, again, if I'm representing Abdul Qadir, am I saying, hey, you're going to be one of the first defensive players taken off the board. Do you play? And if you do, hey, I need another, what's it worth to you? I think it's a fair conversation. Like, this is the part of NIL, and I don't know how Penn State's collective is built, right? Last year I was told like Georgia's was built where players got paid after the bowl game. But that bowl game was January 1, I think, right? We're talking about January 9th, right? When this game will be played. So I'd be curious, is it worth the risk? I don't know. Yes, 20 years from now, and you're with your team and you're celebrating a national championship, yeah, it was worth it. 6 months from now, when you can be the number one or top 10 pick, I don't even know who the number one pick would be right now. Abdul Qadir is probably going to be in the conversation for one of those high draft picks. So I don't know, man. I'm so curious what that dynamic is like because he is a tremendously gifted player. I'm going Penn State. I think Drew Allar is the difference in this one. I think that his shoulders have dropped. I said it from training camp, seen it all year. I just think he's so unique. I think they're just too much. I think they're just lean on him too much. I don't see Notre Dame controlling the clock all game long in this one. But I will say this about Notre Dame. I'm a huge Marcus Freeman fan. And I read this in somebody's column this week, and it was spot on. And it was like, Notre Dame is likable. And the first time in my life, Notre Dame is likable. They weren't likable with Lou Holtz. I loved Ron Powell. He was my idol. We talked about this. I had a sign on my bed that said, "Dear Yogi, best wishes, Ron Powell," my whole childhood. I love what Notre Dame has been. I always wanted to go there until Urban Meyer decided I wasn't good enough. And they chose Ronnie Rodimer. And not that I'm pissed about it, but whatever. But they're likable. I'd argue they're lovable. Either way, I'm happy with how that one shakes out. I think Penn State's the better team. The Texas game, watch for this, Jim. Two things to watch. Texas plays a ton of zone coverage until they get in around inside the 25-yard line, like the high red zone area. For whatever reason, Jeremiah Smith rarely had two guys on him in the Oregon game. I just know Pete Kwiatkowski well enough and this defense well enough. They don't give up big plays. They pride themselves on creating turnovers. They're going to force Will Howard to throw to everybody else other than the best receiver in America. How does that play out? Okay, well then what does Chip Kelly do? How does Chip Kelly navigate this? He's gone up against Pete Kwiatkowski twice, and has had success. Granted, it was at UCLA, and granted they didn't have Jeremiah Smith or anywhere near this type of team. But I wonder that. It's not a high-pressure team in Texas. They kind of sit back and say, okay, pick us apart, Will. And Will likes getting the ball out of his hand. So I'll be curious. I would be playing press coverage, help over the top. Texas's weakness to me is their linebackers. I'm talking crossing routes, angle routes. I'd be doing that, shifts and motions, force Texas, to over-communicate defensively. On the other side, watch Caleb Downs, number 2 for Ohio State. It is awesome to watch him. I'm going to do a breakdown in our pregame show about him. He's basically playing center field. And sometimes he'll play deep center field, and sometimes he'll come near the line of scrimmage. He's really challenging. The number one key for Steve Sarkisian's offense is they have to account for him. And they call it in the receiver world, Jim, they call it MDM, most dangerous man, block the most dangerous man. So you run vertically, and if you see a dangerous man coming and crashing on the run, you get off the corner and you block him. I don't think that's how you do it against Caleb Downs. You have to have somebody assigned for him every snap. Okay, I'm the tackle. I'm going to reach block, get to number 2. I'm the slot receiver. I'm going to push crack on number 2. You have to block him because he will wreck you. Go back and watch the Oregon game. He's everywhere. He is freaking everywhere. And to me, it was as though Ohio State had an extra defender on the field. If I'm playing quarterback, I'm like, God, where is this guy? He's everywhere. I think that gives Ohio State the advantage. I think they win in a pseudo road game and find their way back to the state of Georgia in a potential all Big Ten matchup. So, finally, Jim, do you think that instead of going to Georgia, because I believe it, they should just kind of reverse course and head back to Pasadena and have the national title there every year? No.
Yes and no.
You pause. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Yes and no. There's so much would have to happen for that to happen.
Of course, yeah.
It's a complete restructure of the entire college football season. Because the beauty of that is it being New Year's Day in Pasadena. Not that they haven't had, in past history where they've played the Rose Bowl game, then still had, a BCS national championship game after the fact. But there's the magic that goes along with that. Now, from what we've seen most of the last 25 years, is you're going to have 2 teams and 2 fan bases that are going to be traveling across completely across the country for that. So
okay.
I don't know. I think there's still something to the moving that game around to try and keep fan bases in all different parts of the country engaged in that title game. I get the reason why people are saying it. I'm just not fully there with that.
Yeah, I think that the gas on that is that it's the most it's ever been. And I think part of it is what we referenced earlier of we're all hanging on to the pageantry because we saw glimpses of it. And I get that. And I think that's why this offseason, I think, will be one of the most dynamic ones we've ever seen in the sport. We will cover it here. Before we get to that, a guy whose off-season is his on-season is our guest. It's Brian Stumpf. He's the president of Elite 11. I believe this is his 27th or 28th year. Played wide receiver at Cal, joined student sports, and has been running these events all across America. He's like the Jim Nagy of college. He's seen every elite player. Quarterback, receiver, linebacker, lineman. He's seen everybody under the sun. To me, if I'm looking for a GM, he's the first guy I am calling. Brian Stumpf, he's our guest today. As always, every one of our guests are presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. So without further ado, dear friend and true expert at not only the quarterback position, but all things evaluation in college and high school football, Brian Stumpf. As referenced, Brian Stumpf, president of Elite 11, Stack Sports. He has seen quarterbacks in really every position for over 27 years. As always, all of our interviews are presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go, go, go. Brian, you've been on a version of this podcast for the first time here at Y Option. Thank you for taking some time out of your day, man.
Absolutely. Appreciate you getting me on. And it's been a long time coming. I'm excited to finally hop on with you guys.
Yeah, we've talked about having you on for a long time and reference you many times on this show if you get to listen to that. But a big reason why is that I think your lens at the evaluation of high school prospects and college prospects is the best in America. I comp you to like Jim Nagy. What Jim Nagy does in the NFL, and no surprise, he's been up for GM jobs. He runs the Senior Bowl. No surprise, your name at times is linked to GM roles as well. And we're in this new era of college football. So I'm just kind of curious for you, when you look at the past 27 years and how you view the game, curious about like the lens in which you view it when you're evaluating, let's just stay on quarterback specifically, some of the traits as everything has changed, what has really remained the same for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Yogi. And as you go through this journey that I've been on personally, the fun part is you stack years and you take away things, I think, from every year and experience, and you add to your inventory and your checklist and things like that. And I think the biggest thing that it's always going to come back to for me, and the time we get to spend specifically around the quarterbacks through the Elite 11 process, is at the end of the day, you really have to love football and love what you do and love the work you have to put in, because it's only getting harder for these players to work through everything that's going on. And it's going to get tougher and tougher for kids to get recruited out of high school now with portal movement in college football and junior college eligibility now coming into play. So just to get a scholarship out of high school is going to be even tougher than it's been in the past. So you have to love it, because there's so much competition out there and there's so many distractions in this world we live in as well, to stay on that path, because to make it all the way through, you've got to have some fortune, you got to have some some luck. You have to pick the right program and have a great team of people around you to help you with that process, and also help you to be able to focus on what matters and chase what matters, as we like to say, and pursue everything you need to do to be successful at this sport, because it's not getting easier for these kids. So it ultimately comes back to their love of the game after you check the prerequisite boxes on talent and physical traits and things like that. You got to love it, because it's a really tough journey to be able to wake up in the morning and go grind at those workouts and do the extra film work, and you have to do more of it on your own now, more than ever, again with the movement of coaches as well. So your development is really back on your shoulders as a player now, and so love it is going to make it a lot easier to work through that grind.
I love what you always say at the beginning of Elite 11, which is like the one thing we can guarantee is that your path is going to go in a different way than you imagine. It's never going to be linear. We see that with the transfers, the movement at the quarterback position, whether it's from when they're with us at the Elite 11 finals to where they sign, or after year 1, 2, or 3 in college. Here we have Jaden Rashad off to his third school, and I could see him at the Elite 11 like it was yesterday. And there's many cases like that. There's many stories like that. I love what you said around like loving the craft. I think that it's becoming so hard to develop in the craft in college. I'm curious if you see it like that, and what you might say to quarterbacks as they do move to get on the field, presumably in a quicker or faster rate than maybe the first choice that they have at their initial place that they sign.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, right? I would say development, and even put air quotes up there, is probably within the college football world institutionally at an all-time low at the quarterback position. And that's no fault of the coaching staff. Everyone has to think so close to their foreheads as it relates to the next hour and next day, versus being able to really look and forecast long-term with their program. And they also now have the opportunity to go into the college portal. And if you're at a top program like in Oregon, do we stay with these high school quarterbacks that we've, recruited and developed, or you can go in and get a Dylan Gabriel out of the portal and know you can compete for a national championship and have a known commodity come in. So again, it's no fault of the coaches in the institutions, but their access to talent, is better than it's ever been, to be able to go out and pluck a ready-made player versus focusing on development in their quarterback room. So I think the challenge now is back on the player and the people around the player, to really hone in on that development. So great if you get recruited and you sign with the power conference and you're getting a little NIL cash at the beginning. you better make sure you're reinvesting that NIL money into your development and really looking at it like you're a pro already, as it relates to, making sure you're getting time with your quarterback trainer if you have one from high school, because the college guys, again, really aren't going to have the time to focus on your mechanics and footwork, especially if you're the 2 or the 3. So really lean back in on development if that's what you want to do and you're driven to be the best, because, for better or worse, the circumstances are now the college coaches and the staff really have less time to spend on that than they ever have.
Okay, there's a lot of things to follow up there, but I want to get to the games. We have seen Drew Allar. We saw him at the Elite 11. I can remember Quinn Ewers like it was yesterday at the Elite 11. We have not seen, at least I didn't see in the finals, Will Howard. I know you've seen him on the road coming out of Pennsylvania. Riley Leonard went to Duke, transferred to Notre Dame. What do you recall about those 4 quarterbacks? If you want to take it, Cotton Bowl, and then the game down in Miami in the Orange Bowl. I'm kind of curious, like, take people back to when you first saw them on a high school field or a professional field where you got to evaluate these 4 QBs.
Yeah, absolutely. And have good recall of all 4 of these guys. You mentioned the Cotton Bowl. We can start there with Quinn. I think, he was the first uber recruit at the quarterback position in the NIL era, right? And the intense scrutiny that was on him as he went through that summer in 2021, coming out to the Elite 11 finals, I really feel like he benefited from that experience of being there and being able to be one of 20 guys socially off the field, and let his guard down a little bit, because he was, at that time, he was the perfect quarterback recruit. And I think it was 247 that had him rated, 1,000 on their scale, right? And I can remember getting questions like that from media during the event. And he was a high school kid at the end of the day, and coming out to get better. And I think it was a good event for him to, let his guard down, be one of the guys and humanize himself from the standpoint of all the things that were going on around him, the bleached mullet, the perfect recruiting ranking and things like that. And he was just a 17-year-old high school kid that had flaws like everyone else and was working to get better. So, certainly a whirlwind coming out of that event, and he enrolled in early at Ohio State and eventually went in the transfer portal back to Texas, like 3 of the 4 quarterbacks that are playing now in the semifinals have transferred. But he's also a little bit of a unicorn, because these other 3 quarterbacks are big, athletic guys that can move around pretty well and have some physical traits. Not that Quinn doesn't, but Quinn is much more of an arm talent guy that really lit it up in high school, obviously, and has transitioned that on to Texas. But you contrast that with Will Howard. So we saw Will Howard. He's a little bit older, obviously, 23 years old. He was in the class of 2020. So we saw him in the spring of 2019, same class as guys like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud that year. And Will Howard's recruiting was a little slower, mainly due to, sophomore year. And then he hurt his wrist his junior year. So he only played 7 games as a junior. He's out of Pennsylvania, place near and dear to your heart.
Downingtown. Let's go,
Downingtown. That's right. That's right. So I think if he had a healthy junior year and been able to put up some numbers, because he had a great senior year, if he had a healthy junior year and done the things that he showed as a senior throughout a full year and have that inventory of tape, he probably would have been a little higher on a lot of people's radars. Going to Kansas State, obviously, out of high school is no slouch, obviously, there. That's still a great school. And, he really is a testament to being able to overcome adversity, I think, throughout your career. And he's had some ups and downs at Kansas State. Got thrown on the field really early with some injuries to Skylar Thompson. And really at one point was recruited over when they took Adrian Martinez out of the portal, right? But again, he kept his head down, kept working. And when Martinez got hurt and he got that opportunity his sophomore year, he made the most of it. And it's been, obviously a lot of good things since then, and transferring into Ohio State and doing what he's done this year. So excited for both those games. And then you look at a guy like Drew Allar, who was Elite 11 finals, same year as Quinn Ewers, out of the class of 2021. And he has unique, I think, twitch for his size. He's not quite Josh Allen physically in terms of pulling it down and running, but he moves for a big man and has arm talent that is, I would say, uncommon. I think we all walked out of that finals that year, and there was Cade Klubnik, the MVP, and a couple other guys that showed well, Quinn being one of those. But, if we were picking 3 or 4 guys, I think that we would think would be successful at the college level and have a chance to, be talked about as an NFL prospect, Drew would have been one of those guys. And super humble kid, hardworking. So it's no surprise to see the success he's had at Penn State so far. And I think he's going to have an interesting choice to make as he goes through these next game and potentially 2 games, and as it relates to looking towards the next level, because this quarterback draft class, I would say, probably doesn't rank as one of the most outstanding ones to this point. So there might be an opportunity for him to jump in there and have a lot of, I think, first round buzz if things go well for him the next week or 2 here. So, and then Riley Leonard was a guy that I loved. He was the COVID year. So if you recall that year, we did 2 regional camps and then we got pulled off the road, and there was a lot of uncertainty for a time that we were even going to be able to do the Elite 11 finals. We got to May, we figured out that we'd be able to do something in Tennessee that year with the restrictions there or lack thereof. And then we really hustled to work back with guys that we liked on tape to see if they could film some workout footage and things like that. So I went back and forth with Riley Leonard a bunch, actually, via text and Twitter, trying to get him to do some stuff. And he was a great basketball player out of Fairhope High School in Alabama. He had offers to St. Mary's and other like legit college basketball programs. Like he was a baller. So loved the athletic traits. Had a little bit of good film from his junior year and heard some good things from him from the QB country guys down there, David Morris. But we weren't able to put it together. I think he would have been a finals guy that year if we'd have been able to get connected on the workout stuff, but he had a wisdom tooth and some basketball things going on. But loved the physical traits. No surprise to see the success he's had. And so, super excited, obviously, as a football guy to check out how these semifinals and obviously the CFP game evolve here the next 2 weeks.
I'll tell you what, I could just listen to you talk all day. I mean, you've got a photographic memory, and I'm just going to put you on blast right now. But I do believe that Brian's ability to see through not just the film, but through the person and get a true eval is amazing. I think what you just shared on those 4 guys, there's notes on everybody. I go to Quinn, and I could just, to your point, he was dubbed the perfect quarterback. There is no such thing. And I remember him like yesterday. He went viral because he threw a Patrick Mahomes-like pass lackadaisically at a quarterback camp in LA, not ours, I think Steve Clarkson's, and goes viral. And I can remember talking to him and him telling me, quote unquote, I never asked to go viral. And all of a sudden it was like the projection. And I love what Ryan Day said about him earlier of like, he offered him in 8th grade. He knew how gifted he was as a passer and how people in the Woody Hayes Center still have and hold him in such high regard. And I think so many people thought he was like the flashy guy because I felt like the community of football lovers wanted him to be a character when he was actually like a human being. And I love the growth that he's had since he's returned home to Texas. And you're right, what he went through in the NIL world and the high school state legislation around NIL was just totally different than anything we'll ever see again. You reference a lot of the evaluations. I think the GM thing is becoming such a real role in college football, right? I think we'd all agree upon that, whether we saw it happen with Courtney Morgan and from Washington to Alabama, and now we're seeing it pop up everywhere. I'm curious for you, like, how is like that position, that GM role, impacting college football and the roster building? And as you look at it, because you see it through such a unique lens, like if Brian Stumpf puts his GM hat, like what's your ideology? Like how would you say is the best way to operate and navigate the building of a roster in this current landscape we sit in?
Yeah, it's a great question, Yogi. I think it one, first and foremost, would be dependent on where you are. What's your recruiting base look like? What roster are you inheriting? Things of that nature, and then the staff that you're working with. I think in a perfect world, you're mirroring your evaluations up with your coaching staff and the system you guys are running. So you're working hand in hand, and that's really what we tried to do, obviously, at Elite 11. From our perspective and how we've done quarterbacks and other positions, we've evaluated things, irregardless of system. We're trying to project guys to the next levels based on their physical traits, but also what we can learn about them. And then we've had a really unique opportunity the past 25 years. I think you put me at 27. You're aging me a little bit. I'm probably still like at 25 and a half. Okay, it's all good.
My bad.
It's all good. It's close. You're in the ballpark. But we've had a unique opportunity to go out and layer years upon years of learnings, right? And I think I'll call it the sniff test of just being able to gauge the athlete's character and football character more so, when you get out on a field with a kid and watch them work at the end of the day and take coaching, because those are two things that are going to dramatically impact their development. You can watch the tape and you can have a baseline eval and everyone has their boxes to check on physical traits, but how is the kid going to take coaching and how much work is he going to do on his own is going to dramatically impact, moving forward his development. And again, I talked about it earlier on the quarterback side. It's more and more is really on these kids, especially as they transition sometime from 2 or 3 programs over the course of 3 or 4 years in college. So you've got to find kids that are self-starters and driven and motivated to be great. Because again, the staff has less and less time to focus on that, given the time and everything that's going into it. But back to your original question, I think in a perfect world, the front office at a college program is married with the coaching staff, and they're on the same page as it relates to the kids they want in their program, and then going out and building the processes to identify and do the homework. Because as they build out these you call them front office staffs, really, as you build out your front office staff, you're going to have more resources to put into doing the homework and finding those kids that do love the game and are self-starters that are going to do the work and ultimately build the trust. So the staff is not only going to know they have the talent, but then also they're going to do the work. So they trust them when they put them on the field. They're going to do the things that they're asked to do and do it in a great way.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I hear David Shaw in my eyes, who, by the way, is interviewing for the Bears later on this week, which is really cool. Excited for him and Pete Carroll, both interviewing for the Bears. To be lucky to have either one of them.
Yeah.
But he would always say to me, he felt like 3 quarterbacks in a room were the best because it gave each quarterback enough oxygen to breathe, right? Like they had a shot to play. I think that that might even be too much now. So as you think about the movement, I'm going to give you a couple names and where they landed because they all are different, right? We got John Mateer goes from Wazoo, not a big recruit, to Oklahoma. You got Fernando Mendoza from your alma mater at Cal, which, by the way, that one shocked me the most. You've got Aaron Rodgers and Jared Goff, and you go to Indiana, right, with not a lot of quarterback pedigree outside of Curtis Rourke in this past year. Malik Murphy, we know. He goes Duke to Oregon State. Miller Moss was a Heisman candidate after week 1 and the LSU game. Now he's at Louisville. We know Caden Salter because of the Elite 11. He goes Liberty to, I think, Colorado. They might have nailed it the best out of anybody with what their quarterback room looks like. Devin Dampier, New Mexico to Utah. Malachi Nelson, SC, Boise State, UTEP. And then most recently we saw Sam Heward, who went UW, Legacy, to Cal Poly, to Utah, to now going to play for his uncle at the University of Southern California. When you hear all those, I'm curious with a GM lens, your Elite 11 lens, what intrigues you the most about a handful, if you want to choose 1 or 2 of those guys?
Man, it's a great question, Yogi. We could do when you're done with CFP, we could do a whole portal, I think, breakdown recap, which would be a lot of fun to dig into it. I think the Caden Salter one, and you referenced it at Colorado, there was certainly a lot of noise and scrutiny around Coach Prime when he got going, right? And how is this going to look? And is he going to stay when his sons leave? And they're set up to be really successful, I think, at the position there, if they can manage the expectations and the personalities of the 2 quarterbacks in the room. But they're 2 talented guys. I think they have similar skill sets. Juju isn't quite the runner that Caden is. And Caden probably isn't quite the precision, accurate passer that Juju is, but they're similar physical tool sets and builds. And I think that you can plug them into an offense and ask them to do a lot of the same things. But you got the veteran, the savvy guy. He's close to 40 starts now in his career. He's seen it all from being at a big time program at Tennessee to going to Liberty and leading him really to unprecedented heights. Fiesta Bowl against Oregon 2 years ago. So a really savvy, veteran, experienced guy who's mentored players and mentored for us at the summer at the Elite 11, being a college counselor and plugging him in with another uber recruit that's had a ton of focus and attention and a lot of high expectations, I think, to come in and play early. So I think there's a really great opportunity there to marry experience with youthful exuberance and hopefully have a really good working relationship in that quarterback room where Juju can learn a lot from Caden and his experiences of going into a big time program with a lot of expectations and how to deal with it better than Caden did when he was at Tennessee. And for Colorado to be able to balance, I think, the expectations to get a young guy on the field where again, you have to win and you want to win and you want to compete for the CFP every year. So they're a place where expectations have raised now, and for good reason. And I think they've put themselves in a great position in that quarterback room to marry experience with some talent that can take over at some point.
Yeah, I'm so curious to navigate to watch that play out, because on one hand, that's what UW did, right? They had Will Plummer, and then in came the freshman Damon Williams, and they had like the savvy vet, and they groomed the young guy, Julian Lewis. Like, he's reclassified, so he's even a different type of young guy. Like, he should just be going into his senior year, yet he's already on campus in Colorado. I wonder, like, I think a Mikey Keene goes from Fresno State to Michigan, and they paid reportedly like $10+ million for their freshman quarterback. Like, is that going to be the model? And then as the coaching staff, you have to trust your recruiting, right? Like, I look at Michigan this past year, like, they trusted their recruiting, and look where it netted out with them at the quarterback position. And they started 3 different quarterbacks throughout the entirety of the season and didn't have the season that people have an expectation for. So that'll be unique. So let's finish up with this. Your Cal Bears. Jaron Politelli goes from Cal to Oregon. I watched him in pregame warmups last week at the Rose Bowl. I gave him a fist bump on his way in and off the stadium, along with Akili Smith Jr. And now he's at Cal. I'm curious for you. Like, to me, I look at it, he's now going to be the starter there. Like, I know that room is unique, but like, are we in that world now? Like, if you get one of those physically matured freshmen, do you have to ride with them early on, and your kind of takeaway from one of the more unique quarterback signings and changes that I think I've ever seen in the course of my career at this position?
Yeah, I mean, Jaron's experience, I think, was certainly one filled with turns and ups and downs, akin to a roller coaster. I compared a little bit to Dante Moore a couple years back, where Dante was committed to Oregon for quite some time, a little bit of staff change right before signing day, where that year it was Kenny Dillingham taking the job at Arizona State. And just that uncertainty the week or two before signing day, with all of a sudden you don't know who's going to be coaching you, right? And that person with Mike Blesh at Cal, the offensive coordinator, who was getting replaced at the time right before signing day, and that news leaked out. You don't know who all of a sudden is going to be coaching you, and that's a big deal, right? So had obviously a great opportunity to pivot to Oregon, and makes a lot of sense. And they have such a legacy with Hawaiian quarterbacks, recently with Marcus and Dylan Gabriel, and 2 people that he really looked up to, right? So I think it was a tough choice, but in kind of hearing things and going through the last couple of weeks, it sounded like his heart was always in one place, and maybe that first couple of weeks at Oregon just solidified that. So I give credit to Jaron in terms of just being able to take a step back and realize where he wanted to be, it sounds like, and have the courage to stand up and make that decision instead of riding it out for 6 months or a year even. In this climate, especially, it's tough to do that. And so I think the opportunity to get on the field is certainly one that he's looking at. And you look at how this quarterback movement has evolved the last couple of years in the portal. The opportunity to get on the field early and have success can really portend to great things down the road. A couple of guys we talked about early, obviously, with Will Howard and Riley Leonard, going maybe not to powerhouse programs in Kansas State and Duke, but being able to get on the field, get experience, eventually have success. And then you transfer up to those programs that I think, in a Notre Dame or an Ohio State, that are probably going to be perennial CFP competitors. So I think Jaron's example, and maybe do some elite high school quarterbacks that are identified as guys that can have a chance to get on the field early, they start looking less at the blue bloods every year and going and being 3rd or 4th in a pecking order potentially, or do they try to identify a place that fits their style of play and a coach they feel that can develop them? And great, maybe you go there and you have a great 3 years and you're a first-round pick. Maybe you go there, you have a great 2 or 3 years, and you can then transfer to that blue blood and compete for a CFP. So I think the smart quarterbacks and smart people that are around these quarterbacks, whether it's high school coaches or quarterback trainers, the opportunity to get on the field if you are ready to play and you're going to be at a place that can prepare you and develop you. If it's not a blue blood, that could be a really intriguing option moving forward for a lot of these quarterbacks that I think historically, as we go back and, again, look at Elite 11 and all the research you've done with 5-star quarterback in the past 20 years, these guys more often than not just go to the same 15 or 20 schools and they're stacked in a quarterback room, and that might last for a year or two. And then some of these guys that you talked about, and you mentioned Jaden Rashada, Malachi Nelson, now they're on year 3 of college without any real film. So as they go back into the portal, they're at a huge disadvantage in terms of trying to, be able to compete for a good spot at a place to go in and have a chance to play versus these guys that, Mikey Keene that went and got on the field at Fresno State and got on the field and has great tape. And now he's in a position to start at Michigan.
Okay. Before we cut you loose, I'd be remiss to not ask, like, to the parents that are listening, right? We just did the Elite 11 Academy, which was basically like junior high through 9th, 10th grade, that age group. For the parents of like upperclassmen, players going into their senior year, navigating recruiting and all the things, like what might you say based on all of your experience to them if there was a guiding light to try to navigate all the new worlds that exist?
I mean, I'm going to steal it from you just in terms of the chase. What matters is really important. So as you look at your college choice, if that's what we're talking about, highly recruited seniors or quarterbacks that are aspiring to play in college, you really have to focus on what matters. I look back at a Jaden Rashada when we were at Elite 11 with him, and he had just gone through the public, reveal really of how much money Miami at that time was going to pay him to sign. And it was something that rocked his world. I know that did not benefit him to have that out in public. And however that happened, and the adults that were working with him and his family, that was not what mattered to him. And I think you and I both recall conversations with him where he wanted to be somewhere else and he felt a connection somewhere else. So what mattered to Jaden didn't ultimately end up being the key decision as it relates to where he went to school, unfortunately. So I think, again, the player is the one that's going to have to go into whatever situation they select with a school and survive, thrive, or not make it. So hopefully what matters to the player versus an NIL bag or the agent's relationship with a certain front office or coach that might drive a decision, ultimately it's the player that's going to have to go in and be in that environment and go to that school and be in that locker room. And so hopefully it's what matters to the player that is going to be the biggest factor in the decision, and whether that's development, whether that's getting on the field early, maybe it is the money for his family, and that's fine if it is. But I think in that specific example, you could tell by the player's reaction that it wasn't his choice, and it really had a dramatic impact, I think, on his first couple of years in college, unfortunately.
Amen, man. And Elite 11, we got some news. Elite 11, we got some regional camps coming. What can you tell us? What is the latest and greatest to all the young aspiring quarterbacks that are listening to this?
Yeah, we're getting ready it'll be year 27 of Elite 11 coming up here in 2025. So we're pretty close to pushing out our 8 regional camp dates for this spring. That'll be where we invite out all the top rising seniors and then some really good underclassmen as well. But the rising seniors, we'll be looking at those guys to come out and learn first and foremost, but also compete for hopeful selection to the Elite 11 finals coming up this summer. So super exciting time. Love to get out on the road. And like I said, getting to meet these kids in person, you learn so much about them, but also it's a fun time of year as you're diving into tape and hopefully uncovering some gems to go along with maybe some of the more known names in this year's class.
Amen. Well, Brian, thank you for the time. I know how busy you are gearing up for the 2025 Elite 11 run. But as always, your voice is so trusted. Your lens is as good as I've ever seen in my life, man. Appreciate the time coming on Y Option today, man.
Absolutely, Yogi. It's great getting on with you, and I'll do it anytime you ask.
I love it. There it is. Brian Stumpf, president of Elite 11. It's the afterglow. That was Brian Stumpf, president of the Elite 11. Confirmed. It's the 25th and a half year that he has done that. Of course, every one of our guests presented by our founding partner, 76, keeping you in the know on the go. Brian Stumpf and that staff is about to hit go. Jim, you know it. We were at the finals last year in LA. We'll be at the finals again this upcoming summer. TBD on when and where that is, but it'll be full of the best and the brightest. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of dialogue around the transfer portal window at quarterback and the GM roles within college football. I'm curious for you, a lot that we talked about. What were your takeaways? What's something that landed, or maybe you wish that we did dive into?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I said it with every other interview that we did where that was a guest of there. But now that I actually had Brian on, it's just, again, a personal thank you to Brian for being so accommodating last summer. Him and the crew, they were unbelievable. But yeah, I thought it was super interesting, and so much more meat on the bone there, especially with the quarterbacks and the transfers to really get into. I was really interested in what he had to say about the Colorado situation there. And it was just kind of funny that, uh, last summer, neither Caden Salter nor Juju Lewis were penciled in to go to Colorado this year. And now both of them will be there together. So just shows you how crazy that all was to go. And then also just talking about, getting stuff on tape. And, it makes me think, because I just saw a story in the news recently about how former 5-star recruit quarterback Ty Thompson, who went to Oregon and, was at Oregon for a few years and then, then had to go through the whole portal. Now he's going to switch to tight end. He's, so just it's the phrase that you use all the time, that nothing's going to work out the way you think it's going to work out. That's the one thing for sure. So where, even just thinking about the quarterbacks that we saw just last summer, probably a handful of them flipped from the school that they were expected to go at that point to now. So where a year from now, where will all those guys be, and just continuing to follow that path? The game, it ain't slowing down. That's for sure.
There's this old adage, like when you played, that your first spring ball is the most important one. I can remember going to campus, and our safety at the time was a guy named Mark Ponko. He was like a 4-year starter. He was like, Yogi, your first spring is the most important, because you're going to set the tone for who you are as a player, and then the staff is going to know, do they have to recruit over you or not? And I've always remembered that, right? So it was critical for me, and I ended up becoming a starter after my first spring as a freshman. I think of it now of like, is the best model, it hit me during the conversation, what Jed Fish did at UW, where you've got the savvy vet in Will Plummer, and you've got Damon Williams, the rock star freshman. You feed him a couple drives a game, and then he takes over. Like, I think there's something to that. The problem is that every one of those freshmen don't always work out. It's why we wrote the book 5-Star QB. Like, the majority of 5-star big-time quarterbacks don't pan out to become number 1 draft picks. I think only 12 in the 25 years now of recruiting have ever become first-round draft picks. Like, if you think about the 136 5-star quarterbacks, I think they're in totality among that. So is that the best model? Is what Colorado doing? Like, that's a version of that model. Is that the best model? Or is it, kind of what Oregon's done? Like, they found like the most experienced guy who's a baller to come in, and the way they built their room is so unique, right? You had 2 transfers and 2 guys coming out of high school in Luke Moga and Austin Novosad. Like, I don't know what it is, but I know that there's so many different models right now, and I'd be so curious to sit down with a few GMs and hear, what is your lens on the position? And is it purely reactive? Because if you're purely reactive, then like you're not really developing. Like, I look at Oregon and I say, okay, I love Akili Smith there as a freshman because he's a developmental player. He is not Jaron Sagapolatele, who's now at Cal. Jaron, I think, is further along in his quarterback arc. He's more ready to play now. But Akili's got all of the tools you could dream of. So now under Will Stein and company, like, does he just continue to develop? And in 2 years, do they play a guy who's developed that they've seen every day? Or do they say, here, I don't know, like, should we go get a proven guy? Like, that to me is going to be the dance. Look at Ohio State where I sit, right? Julian Sayin is the heir apparent. Aaron Nolan, I believe, went to South Carolina, who was the other 5-star quarterback who came in the same class. You look at Devin Brown, reportedly going to come back out west to play quarterback. Keep an eye on that if that ends up becoming a fact. He's currently the backup at Ohio State. He's going to stay with the team through their CFP run. But does Ohio State feel as though that in his second year, Julian Sand could lead a team to a standard, which is national championship? We'll find out. Like, or do they say, hey, let's go get our version of an experienced starter? And who is that now? Like, Mikey Keene's going to start for Michigan. I called Fresno State UCLA. Mikey Keene's a good player, but he's nowhere, in my opinion, he's not JJ McCarthy, right? He's not Dylan Gabriel. He's not that type of transfer. He might be maybe a version of Will Plummer. Maybe. Will Plummer is also like I think the all-time leading passer in the SEC. Is that accurate? I think that's coming to my mind. That might be a fact. He threw for an insane amount of yards. Attempts, completions. Yeah. Why do I keep saying Will Plummer?
Because he was with Jetfish in Arizona.
Yeah. Will Rogers. Excuse me for the many screw-ups here at the back end of this podcast. So it's just a cool conversation. So we will bring this conversation back. We'll probably bring Brian on back to have this conversation because nobody's more skilled. I think my favorite thing was that he remembered like that Riley Leonard had his wisdom tooth taken out during his evaluation in like the 2020 season. Like, that's how dialed he is. So for all those people looking for a GM, I keep saying it, nobody's better. If you got to navigate the portal, quarterbacks, and I don't think Brian, I don't even know if he wants that job. It's a chaotic, crazy job. I talked to a coach in Power 4 football earlier this week, and he goes, that's the worst job in football is to be a GM right now. Granted, you're going to make like $1 million, but I get it. Like, it's just constant, So there's some trade-off there. All right, there it is. That's Brian Stumpf. He's Jim Thornby. I'm Yogi Roth. Big love to 76. Go to yoption.com. Check out our most recent newsletter. There's a ton of, I think, juicy stuff in there in between the lines there. Take a look at that. And then we'll have recaps all on social media from this game here at the Cotton Bowl. I'll do a newsletter coming back home on Saturday morning and kind of keep you up to speed on all the things here in Dallas as media days, teams arrive, all of those things begin to happen. There it is, folks. Stay safe. And lots of love to all of our friends in Southern California. Peace.